Welcome. Today we're working on a mid-modern century table here, coffee table I bought at Surplus Place, paid $15 for it, and just love this kind of furniture from this period of time, 50s, 60s, maybe early 70s, but probably this one's early 60s. Let's talk about this piece of furniture just a minute. When you're in a thrift store and you find something like this, I've done this enough to know that the veneer is probably going to be fine on top once I strip it down. Now I will have to use a chemical stripper to do that, which I don't mind. I make sure that I'm outside and it's got plenty of air, so it's not going to be a issue as far as using the stripper, because it is stuff that you don't want to work with in close quarters. This is a lane table, and the way you can tell that is it will be marked underneath somewhere, right here. Got it upside down. You can kind of see the cut as well. Just a very well made piece of furniture here, very heavy. I actually have the mate to this, which I got at another antique store and didn't pay a whole lot of money for. This smaller than this one, which I'm going to try to use these in tandem as coffee tables in a big room. I'm going to see how that works. If it doesn't, I'll just use this and continue to use the other table as an end table. But just feel fortunate I was able to find a similar design. And we're going to be talking a little bit about veneer. Veneer is relatively easy to work with. Now, hopefully I'm not going to have to repair any of this or re-veneer any of it to try to match. I'm just going to strip it down, fix the chigger bites here that we got in different places here, maybe with some epoxy, stain those to match, and put a nice rub-on poly urethane on this table. So we're going to get started here in a minute. Here are the close-ups of the table surface. There's also small areas that are going to have to be repaired with epoxy. Most of these are just surface scratches in the varnish. This is a water stain. We're going to be using Clean Strip Premium Stripper. There are other strippers made that have less fumes, but I'm working in a very well ventilated area outside, and that's not going to be a problem. One unique thing about this table is the grain of the wood goes in two different directions. So I'm going to have to be aware of that when I begin to scrape the varnish and the stain off. You can tell here that I'm going right up to the edge of the grain, which is in one direction, and removing it. I use a window cleaning razor blade. I found that works well for me. Some people use other tools such as a putty knife, steel wool, and I will be using steel wool later on this project to finish removing the varnish. I will repeat this process 3 times. Every piece of furniture is a little different. And then I will go back with steel wool and one last coat on the majority of the table. There will be a couple of areas on the top that I'll have to use the steel wool repeatedly. This is after about 5 minutes of allowing the stripper to sit. At this point, the table has had 3 repetitions of removing the varnish. You see the areas that are splotchy on the table. I'm going back to work really hard on this. And this is different for this table. I have not had this happen often with furniture, but every piece can be a little different. This is a second coat. You can see the splotchiness is getting less and less, and you can really see the grain of the wood start to come out and give me an idea of what the finished product's going to look like. More splotches. I stress with furniture refinishing and repair These are projects that take a while. This is not an afternoon project. Better to have several days. You see how it's less and less noticeable with the splotchiness. And this will be the last time I'll use the steel wool here. The centerpiece of wood did not require as much. Again, being very careful just to work this from the grain direction, not getting into the other areas of the table. Now we'll go back. I used 220 sandpaper on this. This sandpaper had been used a little bit, so it wasn't its normal grit. I really prefer a higher grit sandpaper for something like this, but this is all I had in my shop. I did save, I do have some other sandpaper here, 1000 grit, which I'm going to use on the surface, the top surface. Being careful not to use the sandpaper against the grain. Now I'll go back with mineral spirits, wipe the table down, get any dust from the sanding and any remaining varnish that might be on there. I'll allow that to dry, and then I'm going to go back with the pre-stained wood conditioner. I have some of this in my shop, so I've been using this. This just conditions the wood oftentimes before you put a stain on, but I'm not going to put a stain on this. I'm happy with the color of the table. If you look at the bottom right hand corner, you'll see where I used the wood epoxy. I had a hard time getting a stain that would actually match the top, so I went to plan B and just cut out the epoxy that I had put in there and square the corners up so that I actually could cut a small piece of veneer to fit this area of the table. These seemed like a better plan. I took a razor blade and just carved out the epoxy that was left, and found a veneer that I felt like the grain would match. The problem with this was the stain was too dark, so it stood out. So I found another wood veneer that I had on hand and used that. And then taped it with painter's tape, marked it underneath with a pencil, and then used a utility knife to go back and cut the veneer, the glue to the table. I used a good strong wood glue and took a painter's brush and put glue both on the table and also on the small piece of veneer to be fitted in, taking great pains to not get wood glue on the surface. Once positioned, I took painter's tape, sealed it, and left it to dry overnight. I then went back with a razor and carved it closer to the edge of the table. I allowed a little overhang on the veneer so I could get a perfect fit. I then used some fine grained satin paper to take the edge off. I had worked a sample of stain on the scrap piece of veneer to make sure it was going to match. This worked out much better than the wood epoxy. This is where the true satisfaction of furniture refinishing and repair really comes in, when you bring a piece of furniture like this back to life. And the last step is to use the wipe-on polyurethane, which I prefer. I've used the brush-on for years. Minwax has come out with the wipe-on poly, which I really prefer. It gives it a more professional finish. I really like the sheen, and it's very durable. I'll do this 6 coats. Allow it to dry for 24 hours. And this is the finished product. I'm very pleased with this. So thank you for watching. I plan to do more of these projects in the near future, so please subscribe to my channel and feel free to make comments.